As the U.S. builds up its military might in the Middle East, a senior Gulf official tells Fox News Saudi Arabia would not allow the U.S. to use its airspace or bases for an attack. The president told me this weekend the U.S. cannot share military plans with Gulf allies while it's negotiating with Iran. For more, let's bring in Fox News senior strategic analyst, General Jack Keane. General, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate your time, sir.
Yeah, delighted to be here, Jackie.
So, General, the president told me this quote about not being able to talk to allies. He said, "We can't tell them the plan. If I told them the plan, it would be almost as bad as telling you the plan. It could be worse, actually. But look, the plan is that Iran is talking to us, and we'll see if we can do something." How likely is it, you think, for Iran to negotiate a nuclear deal that the president is so happy with that he doesn't feel the need to strike? Is that really possible?
Yeah, well, a couple of comments. First, on the allies. What our allies, our Arab allies, say publicly and what they do privately are two different things. So let's just take what they have said with a grain of salt here, because there are some things they are doing that obviously they're not publicly recognizing. Secondly, there have been 7 other presidents that have dealt with Iran, this regime, since they came to power in 1980. 3 of those 7 presidents, when Americans were killed by the scores, they did nothing. They didn't even confront the regime. All 7 other presidents stood by and watched the regime increase its capability to dominate and control the region and to destabilize the region as a result of funding its proxies and attempting to weaken and eventually destroy the state of Israel. All 7 of them. 2 of them really appeased the regime in terms of Obama and Biden. Here comes President Trump. He killed Qasem Soleimani. He delivered a decisive blow to the nuclear power regime that they were within months of developing as a part of the Israelis' 12-day war. And now we're at a point of historic significance. What am I talking about? Negotiations would have made sense a year ago, certainly 5 years ago. Negotiations to do what? No enrichment of uranium, limit the missile program, and number 3, no support to proxies. If we got a deal like that in those days, that all would have made some sense, because then we could have waited out and seen what happened. If we go and make a deal with the Iranians today, what are we really doing? We're extending the life of the regime. We're extending it. We're throwing them a lifeline. And it's a gut punch to the protesters. Protesters don't care about the nuclear deal. They care, what are they really in the street willing to die for? We think now tens of thousands have died. The high end is maybe even 30,000.
Wow.
That is staggering, and shows the desperate need of the regime in terms of stopping that protest, because it was threatening their survival. So what we're actually dealing with here is the passing up the opportunity. There is an historic opportunity here to set the conditions through a military strike that puts the regime on the pathway to collapse. The Israelis recognize this, and this is why there's so much delay taking place to bring in robust resources to do something that's decisive. It's not going to be like an invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan, or Haiti, or Panama, where there are ground troops on. There's always going to be a degree of uncertainty to it.
Yeah.
But we have to use our judgment and President Trump's instincts here, and also some spine, dealing with that ambiguity. But we know for a fact that based on what events are in front of us, the regime is the weakest it's ever been. A military strike will weaken that regime further, create divisiveness inside of the regime itself. How long are we going to put up with the mullahs doing this when they're putting so much at risk for ourselves and our way of life? I'm talking about the elites that keep the regime propped up. That is the opportunity. It is a paradigm shift. President Trump, if he achieves this end, which I think is possible while he's president, he will have changed the Middle East for decades to come. It's a major strategic opportunity that was not available a year ago, and certainly not 5 years ago. It is right here in front of us strategically, and we've got to see it for what it is. I trust the president's judgment here. He sees it, and I think he's going to seize that opportunity.
Okay. Yeah, the president did note when I spoke with him that, the last time they were negotiating, it ended with bombing the nuclear facilities. So, that there's that. But I also talked to the Gulf allies this week, and even as some of them are pushing for de-escalation, there is this private acknowledgement behind the scenes that if the U.S. doesn't take some kind of action, the regime could emerge stronger. But how soon could that happen? When are the assets going to be in place to defend against retaliation from that attack if it were to happen? And are you concerned that retaliation could happen outside the Middle East, even in Europe or domestically? How far could that go?
Listen, you have to understand how weak this regime really is, politically, economically, and militarily.
Okay.
We have moved these assets into the region for two reasons. One is to be properly defended in the event of retaliation, and there will be retaliation. So we want to have our air defense systems, both maritime and land-based and air-based, to defend against that, much as it took place post Midnight Hammer, the decisive strike against the nuclear enterprise. The second reason for the robust assets is offensive capability, not only to take leaders down and those repressing the regime and maybe export distribution of oil to truly decimate their oil program, which is they're dependent on China, obviously, to buy that. And everything we can do to interfere with that is good news. But it's also going to be a major focus on ballistic missiles and short-range missiles, because that's what would hit our bases, and that's certainly what would hit Israel. So that's the reason for these assets being brought into the region. Better defense and improved offensive capability. But the idea that this is going to be a regional war, people who are saying that don't really understand the facts. And to think that it's going to expand beyond the region don't understand the facts. This regime is a mere shadow of its former self. Do they still have capability in ballistic missiles? Yeah. They have a lot of bluster and a lot of rhetoric. And you can't pay much attention to it because they've been doing that for these 45 plus years.
Wow. All right.
Our military leaders and our intelligence people are focused on what are their real capabilities, not about the rhetoric and the bluster.
Okay. That's all the time we have, General. I could talk to you forever. We're out of time. I always appreciate it. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, great talking to you, Jackie.
You too.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.